So we're picking up on the first chapter on page 20, and I'm just going to back up a little bit to the top of the page that we left off on, so that way I know exactly where we started. So Bukharin is talking about how strong drink is a very injurious thing and should be produced only for technical work or medicinal purpose. But throughout the world, capitalists are engaged with all of their might in its production. And the reason for this is because from the people's desire for a strong drink, a great profit can be made. We must now make it clear how profit arises. The capitalist receives his profit in the form of money when he sells the articles which have been produced in his factory. How much money does he receive for his goods? Or in other words, what is the price of the goods? How is the price determined? Why is the price of one article lower or higher than the price of another? It is not difficult to see that in consequence of the introduction of new machinery into some branches of production, labor becomes more productive, or in other words, goods are produced more easily, and the prices of the commodities go down. If, on the other hand, production becomes more difficult and fewer wares are produced, or in other words, if labor is less productive, the prices of commodities rise. If society has to expend, on the average, a great deal of labor in the production of a certain article, the price of that article will be high. If little labor is required to produce it, its price will be low. The quantity of socially necessary labor, of the average degree of skill, that is, labor performed with machines and tools which are neither the highest nor the lowest quality, necessary for the production of commodities, determines their value. We now see that price is determined by value. When price is neither higher nor lower than value, it is clear that value and price are roughly synonymous. Now remember what we said about the hiring of the worker. This transaction is the sale of a special commodity, which bears the name of labor power. When labor power becomes a commodity, it is subject to the same conditions as other commodities. When the capitalist engages the worker, he pays him the price of his labor power. Or, in other words, he pays according to his value. But how is his value determined? We have seen that the value of all commodities is determined by the quantity of labor necessary for their production. So, therefore, is the value of labor power. What do we mean by the production of labor power? Labor power is not produced in a factory. It's not linen or boot polish or machinery. What then is it? It is sufficient to look at life under the capitalist system in order to grasp what it is. Let us consider the situation when the workers have stopped work for the day. They are worn out, their energy has been expended, and their labor power is almost exhausted. How can it be renewed? In order to renew it, the worker must rest, eat, and sleep. But before it is possible for him to work again, his capacity to labor, or his labor power, must be restored. Food, clothing, shelter, etc., in short, the things necessary to satisfy the requirements of the worker, represent the production of labor power. Other things have been added in the case of a specially skilled worker, such as the expenses of a long apprenticeship. Everything that the working class consumes in order to renew its strength has a value. Consequently, the value of the necessaries of life and the expenses of education represent the value of labor power. Different kinds of commodities have different values. Different kinds of labor power, therefore, have different values. The labor value of a printer has a different value, say, than that of his assistant. Now to return to the factory. The capitalist buys raw material, fuel, machinery, oil, and other indispensable things. He then buys labor power. That is, he engages workers. For everything he pays money. He begins production. The workers toil, the machines run, the fuel burns, the oil is consumed, the factory buildings suffer wear and tear, and labor power is used up. From the factory, a new commodity comes. This commodity, like all commodities, has a value. But how great is the value? In the first place, the new commodity contains within itself the value of the means of production consumed in its manufacture, the raw materials, fuel, the portion of the substance of the machinery worn away during the process of production, etc. All of this has now passed into the value of the product. Secondly, the labor of the worker is contained in it. If 30 workers each work 30 hours to produce the commodity, then the total number of hours worked will be 900. The total value of the commodity would consist of the value of all of the materials used. Let us suppose that this is equal to roughly 600 hours of work, plus the new value, which the workers have added by virtue of their labor, or 900 hours, and the total value then would be represented by 600 hours plus 900 hours, coming up with a total of 1,500 hours. But how much does the new commodity cost the capitalist? For the raw material he pays in full. That is a sum of money corresponding to the value of 600 hours of work. And how much did he pay for the labor? Does he pay for the whole 900 hours? The solution of the whole problem lies here. He pays, according to our assumption, the full value of the labor power for the number of days worked. If there are 30 workers and they each work 30 hours, i.e. 3 days of 10 hours each, then the employer would pay them a sum of money sufficiently large to enable them to renew their labor power for that number of days. But how great is this sum? The answer is simple. It is clearly smaller than the value of 900 hours of work. Why is this? Because that quantity of labor which is necessary for the maintenance of labor power pays for itself. The difference between that quantity and the 900 hours of labor is not paid for. Suppose I work for 10 hours a day, and suppose that in 5 hours I can produce the value of everything I consume during the whole period of a 10-hour period. I can therefore work longer than is required to meet the expense of the maintenance of my own labor power. In our example, the workers consume in 3 days food, clothes, etc., to the value of, say, 450 hours of work, and they perform work to the value of 900 hours. Thus, the value of 450 hours remains with the capitalist. This number of hours is the source of his profit. The commodities actually cost the capitalist, as we have seen, 600 plus 400 equaling 1,050 hours, and he sells them at the value of 600 plus 900 equaling 1,500 hours. Thus, the difference of 450 labor hours is the surplus value created by the laborers. In the half of the labor time, 5 hours out of each working day of 10 hours, the workers, therefore, produce the value given back to them as wages, and during the other half of their workday, they work wholly and solely for the capitalist. Let us now consider society as a whole. We are not interested in what any individual capitalist or individual worker does, but rather we are concerned with how the whole gigantic machine, called the capitalist system, is arranged. The capitalist class employs a vast number of members of the working class. In innumerable factories, mines, forests, and fields, millions of workers labor like ants. Capital pays them their wages, the value of their labor power, and this money enables them to renew their labor power to again be expended in the service of capitalism. The working class not only pays for itself by its labor, but creates also the income of the upper class through surplus value. Through innumerable channels, this surplus value flows into the coffers of the ruling classes. The capitalist himself receives a share of profit. A part goes to the landlord. A part goes to the capitalist state in the form of taxes. A part goes to merchants, shopkeepers, clergymen, bourgeois writers, etc. On this surplus value live all of the parasites that are created by the capitalist system. A portion of the surplus value is used over again by capitalists. They add it to their capital. Thus, their capital grows even greater. They extend their undertakings. They engage more workers. They install better machines. A greater number of workers creates for the capitalists a still greater amount of surplus value. As capitalist enterprises grow larger and larger, capital goes ever forward with bigger strides. More and more surplus value is heaped up. Because capital extracts surplus value from labor, because it exploits labor, it grows continuously greater. The next section is merely titled Capital. We now see clearly what capitalism is. Above all, it is a definite value, either in the form of money or raw materials, factory buildings, or finished products, but it is only value of such a kind as it serves for the production of a new value, i.e., surplus value. Capital is a value which produces surplus value. Thus, capitalist production is the production of surplus value. In capitalist society, machines and buildings appear as capital. Are machines and buildings, then, always capital? Clearly, the answer is no. When there is a communal industry embracing the whole of society, which processes everything for itself, then neither machinery nor raw material would be capital, because they are not employed as a means of extracting profit for a small handful of rich men. Machinery, therefore, become capital only when they become the property of the capitalist class, and only when they are used for the exploitation of wage labor, and when it serves the production of surplus value. The form of this value does not much matter. It can have the form of coins or of paper money, for which the capitalist buys the means of production and labor power, or it could have the form of machinery with which the workers toil, or a raw material out of which they produce commodities or finished products. Where this value serves for the production of surplus value, it is capital. Capital changes its outward appearance. Let us now consider how this transformation takes place. Firstly, the capitalist has not, as yet, bought any means of production or labor power, but he is eager to engage workers, to provide himself with machinery, to procure goods of the best quality and of the sufficient quality necessary. He has in his hand, at the moment, nothing but money. Here capital appears in its purest money form. In the second stage, the capitalist goes to the market with this money. He naturally does not go by himself. He does his business by telephone or telegraph these days. But in any case, here the purchase of means of production and of labor power take place. He returns to the factory without money, but with workers, machinery, fuel, and raw materials. These things are no longer commodities. They have ceased to be commodities because they are not sold again after this. The money has changed itself into a means of production and labor power, and the money appearance is thrown off. Capital now stands before us in the advanced form of industrial capital. Work then begins. The machinery is set in motion. The workers toil and sweat, and the machinery suffers wear and tear. The raw materials are used up. The labor power is utilized. We will stop here on page 25, lest we be cut off by YouTube, and we will pick up again in the next section, which talks about the third step, or the third level of capital, as it relates to industrialism.